Okay, so I just added this file into the drive, so you should be able to see it. But to start, you will need the 3D M file, the image sampler pattern, Rhino file, and then the .gh file, which is the grasshopper file. So those two are the two files that we need, to start with. If you can also just download this and install, that is a plugin for Grasshopper. So what you do is download it to your desktop and just double click on it. It should launch the installation process. Okay. Can you see my Grasshopper window? Yeah, okay. So when you open the Rhino file, you should see something like this. It's just a canvas, it's just a rectangle over here. And then when you open the Grasshopper file, for those of you who are new to Grasshopper, so in Rhino, just start typing in Grasshopper and then press enter. It will bring up the Grasshopper window. And what you want to do is just drag and drop the Grasshopper file into this window, and it should automatically open. So we don't necessarily expect everyone to have Grasshopper experience, and I don't really need you to be an expert in Grasshopper for this to work. So everything is pretty much sort of designed for you to successfully make these project work, right? So it's like my attitude towards Grasshopper is like, it's just like in Rhino when you click loft, you don't need to how the loft button has been programmed. You just need to how to use it, how to utilize the tool. And it's the same thing, Grasshopper. I will go through what this whole thing does with you. And so you will be familiar enough to make changes to make it do what you want. But you don't necessarily have to know how this was made. Obviously, if this technique piqued your interest and you want to go deeper into this, we have courses specifically for Grasshopper. So don't feel intimidated if I'm going a little too fast. Let me know and I can repeat any step that you need. But what I do need to make sure is that everyone has, things running on your own computer, so we can be on the same page at all times. Okay. So let me know if I'm going too fast, or if you're missing certain steps. If you just open the Grasshopper file, you might receive an error saying there's a lunch missing plugin. So for this file, we are using a plugin, and that's the file that I that's in here. That's the Lunchbox installer application. So let's double click on it, try to install it first. Do you have everything running? Do any of you have trouble? So we can, diagnose your issues if you can share your screen as well. So it is kind of important to have things running. So I want to spend a few more minutes to make sure everyone can see everything that, it's on my screen.
Do I need Rhino 7? Because I have only Rhino 6.
Oh,
Because I can open the Grasshopper file.
okay.
I just can't open the Rhino one.
Okay, so yeah, you don't need Rhino 7 for it. So what you want to do is just to create a rectangle. Lower left corner should be right at the origin, and then it's inches in inches, and it's 48 by 36 inches. Make a flat surface, and then you can, yeah, so I can actually go through that. Yeah, that's all it is in the Rhino file. It's just a single surface. It's the canvas, it's the surface that we're using. 48 by 36. So we can just draw a rectangle surface. So it's good to see what it looks like. So if you need to do that, so just draw a rectangle, the surface, planar curves, and then in here. So now you can see all the nodes kind of giving you error messages. So, usually at the leftmost node of each group, you'll see a surface node. Right click on it, click set one surface. And if you already have your surface selected, it will automatically map onto that. Okay. So let me know if that works for you.
I can't open this file. I have an older version of Rhino.
Can you open the Grasshopper file?
For me, I cannot open the Grasshopper file.
Do I double click to open it, or I import it to Rhino?
So what you can do is in your, do you have Rhino 6?
Mine is Rhino 5.
Oh, you're running on a Mac?
No, it's PC.
Oh, 5 would be a problem. Do you even have Grasshopper with 5?
I don't think I have Grasshopper.
So what you can do is, so maybe you can just watch at this point, because we actually have Rhino 7 running on Launchpad, the cloud platform. So you can do all of this, just by going to Launchpad. Yeah, if you want to try launching a session, I don't know how it works with Zoom and Launchpad running. It might be using a little bit too much bandwidth, but we can talk about maybe, you can try watching this first and see launching everything on Launchpad and see if it works. If not, then we can probably find a way for you to get access to a computer, to a newer version of Rhino. For Hisu, do you know what version of Rhino do you have?
I have 7.
Okay, so your problem is probably the plugin issue. Did you were you able to install the plugin?
No.
So try to download this file, Lunchbox installer, and then double click on it, and so have close Rhino first, install this, and then reopen Rhino.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'll try that.
Yeah, try that. And then when you're done, come back to Grasshopper, just type in on the command line Grasshopper, click enter. This window should pop up, and then just go to File, Open, and locate your file.
Okay, I'll try. Mhm. Thank you.
Anyone else have issue? Elvis, you doing okay?
I'm like working on like installing the plugin.
Okay.
It seems like because I'm using Mac and but I can still like I can still open the Grasshopper file.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there are enough of you have problems with the plugin, everything can work without the plugin as well. You know, just the plugin makes life slightly easier. But so there are a bunch of nodes that don't involve the plugin. So I can kind of go into it a little bit more.
Professor, I have a question.
Yep.
So I installed the plugin and I click on the sampling pattern and turn on the Grasshopper, but it doesn't show me anything like including the things in your window.
So you have to, you can't just double click on the Grasshopper file to open it. You have to open the Rhino file first, and then open Grasshopper, and then drag and drop the file into this Grasshopper window.
Oh, I see. Sure.
So those of you who are in the Master of Architecture program, are you guys already familiar with Grasshopper?
Yep. You're
Okay. Okay. So maybe I can, again, keep installing. Let me know if there's an issue. Don't be afraid to interrupt, because I need to know that you have this running. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So while we're waiting, let me just go through the sort of overall objective. It's a very simple, parametric system that, let's see, that maps a pattern onto a surface, which then we can take for digital fabrication. So typically, you will bring this to a laser cutter to create a pattern, but in this case, we're going to try to use the digital cutter instead. So we will try a number of different options. Okay. So what we are doing, so there in the Grasshopper layout, this first group is one effect. The second group is a slightly different variation from the first one, but it's essentially, for the most part, it's the same. So when you begin to look and compare, you will begin to hopefully understand the differences, and then hopefully you can learn more about how the differences lead to the different results. And then there is a third version of, once again, the same thing. They all do the same thing. They all try to map an image, any image you can find online, pictures you're taking. You can say, I'm inspired by a certain pattern that I see. You can just snap a picture on my phone, and then you can actually use it to generate the pattern, right? So it uses the the intensity value, that means that it turns the image into black and white. And then between the black value and white value, right, use that value to create a pattern, right? And the pattern in this case is a series of circles, right? So you can, you have the ability to change the size of the circle, right? And also, there are a few more things that you can do, right? So in this case, you're able to, let's say, control and let's say eliminate certain size circles. Oh, no. This is circles and this is rectangle, right? So instead of, let's say, creating circles, we can also create rectangles, right? So that's the first one is pretty straightforward. Okay, I will go again. This is a brief overview, so I'll go much deeper into the node structure a little bit once I know that everyone has Grasshopper and Rhino running. So for those of you, again, like who are new to Rhino, what I'm doing right now, if you see a node that's grayed out, right click in the middle. So don't right click on, so you see there's on the left side, it says plane X, Y, radius. So if you right click on the plane, it will try to, like this left column, it brings up a different menu. And if you right click on the right column, it brings up yet another menu, right? So if you right click in the middle where it says rectangle, that's where you can see preview enabled. So a lot of the nodes, when it's grayed out, it's been disabled. So right click and enable it, and you can see what it's doing. So when you highlight something, right, in the Rhino window, it turns green. So it will show you the result of that node that you just created. So now if I disable it, I'm hiding it. So I can see it's basically doing the same thing. And one is giving me circles and one is giving me rectangles, right? Okay, so this is the first group. The second one, it's doing the same thing. The first group lays out the pattern in a rectangular grid. The second group of pattern lays out the pattern in a hexagonal grid, right? So the only difference is this node right here. The first one, using this node called divide surface, it takes a surface and divide it up into rectangles, smaller rectangles. So what you can see is that, the circle line up with one another in a rectangular grid pattern. Okay. The second one, lines up in a sort of diagrid or hexagonal grid pattern. It's very, very minor visually, but depends on what you want to do. You can actually, there's a lot of, it's a major change, okay, both aesthetically and functionally. Okay, so the second one, again, takes the same pattern, right? So in this case, it's more clear because here you can see the image. White has a bigger value. The dark area of the image has a lower value, right? So what this does is that it takes an image and turns it into a black and white image. The black area and the white area has a value between 0 and 1. Okay, so black is 0, white is 1. So anything in between is 0 and 1. So that means that the white area has a bigger circle because it's closer to 1. The black area is closer to 0, so therefore the diameter of the circle is smaller. Okay. You can also right now look at this node, which is not connected, but if you just connect this node to here, it will invert the value. So it will say the white value now is smaller, the black value now is bigger, right? It's closer to 1. No problem. So maybe we'll come back to your problem and where you can share your screen. We can look at it together. Okay. Okay. So so yeah. So this basically inverts the value. So again, you know, if there are any aesthetic reason that you want to pursue things one way or the other, you can easily change the value. So part of the idea is that, you know, we are going to take this pattern and then run it through, you know, the machines for fabrication. So this value here, okay, so as I mentioned, the what this whole thing is doing is basically taking an image, black and white, 0 to 1, remap it so that you know, the number gets used to dictate the dimensions of these circles. But we also have a node here that remaps it. That means that 0 is actually not exactly 0. We can take the what would be 0 to 1 and clamp that, right, and change the value so that, let's say, you know, normally this would be 0 to 1. So if I just double click on it and say 1, right, that means that because the value that's white is 1, that means the diameter of the circle will be 1. That means 1 inch diameter. And that means it's way too big, right? So I want to bring the largest value way down so that they don't intersect like this, right? So what this is doing here is that it's changing, it's remapping the value so that the largest number is no longer too large, so that it begins to intersect with the other circle, right? So what that means right now, the largest circle here is going to be 0.208 inches. And that's a little less than a 1/4 inch, right? So when you are trying to use a machine to cut a 1/4 inch circle, actually 1/4 inch, this is the, actually it's a radius. So it's almost 1/2 inch circle. So it's decent size, right? So, you know, we have to go through the process of understanding if the machine can actually cut, you know, circles this size. This size, I don't know exactly what the number is, but let's say I want to make sure that the circles that are too small don't get through. So I don't have to ask the machine to actually cut circles that are like, you know, 1/32 of an inch, you know, diameter, right? And that's what this side, this node is doing, right? So this node, I can actually say only circles that are larger than or smaller than a certain size gets passed through, right? So if I disable this and enable this and show through, so let's look at only circles that are larger right? So larger than 0.14, it's a little bit over 1/8 of an inch, right? So now this number here is controlling. So circles are way too small, gets eliminated, right? So, okay. So it's a very, very quick and, you know, kind of convenient way to generate something that's more of a pattern based instead of object based. Again, you know, culturally we have moved, you know, like from a sort of design perspective, move from designing objects to designing patterns. and so again, this is a, without having to do a whole class in Grasshopper in generative pattern making, this is a quick way to connect to allow you to generate pattern and quickly go through the fabrication process, because that's sort of what we want to get to, is how do you take a pattern to do fabrication, right? So again, we are right now using circles as a quick exercise. You can be doing rectangles. You can be looking at, the third one is another pattern. We're looking at Voronoi patterns, right? So we can also look at this from again, a bit more of a sort of contemporary aesthetic perspective. If I may just quickly do this, we can generate patterns very, very quickly and easily, and say, create a wall with cutouts, right? So what that means is, what happens if I cut these polygons out, but without completely cutting it out, right? I will leave one side attached, but that side becomes a hinge, and that becomes a sort of light deflector, right? So what happens if this whole wall is basically a series of, kind of folded skin that diffuses light or deflects sound, right? So there are a lot of different ways to think about how you can use patterns and geometry to perform sort of environmental functions, and how it begins to affect certain elements, right? But exactly what that pattern is. So, this one is a Steve Jobs face, right? It's a portrait of Steve Jobs. Is this Steve Jobs face going to work better than or less than, let's say, there's the solar screen that Le Corbusier designed? I don't know. Like that's so where analysis comes in, right? But if the Steve Jobs face doesn't work better than the Brizolais, maybe if an image of an ethereal forest can work better, or maybe in this case, right, I can actually bring in, just double click, click on file path, image of a rock face, right? That work better, right? I don't know, but the idea is that we will not be so critical about like what the pattern is for this class. That's for your design studio, for you to think about. We are just interested in creating a pattern, understanding how we can actually begin to add different elements. Like what happens when I cut a layer of vinyl that has, and again, cut three sides or cut all sides except leaving one side intact so that it becomes a flap. So when wind blows through it, it generates a flapping sound. And because of the size difference, it actually generates sound at different frequencies. So what happens, when you actually make that a meditative sound? Like, can you actually turn that something, and almost like a wind charm, so when you put it on the screen wall, when wind blows through it, it generates a certain effect, right? So we are interested in those kind of questions, like when we're not interested in pattern, if the pattern is interactive, or if the pattern, oh, but rock is so random, I want, rock, pattern that means something. So, you can worry about that in your studio, right? So for this class, we want to say, if we can, how do we take this and say, generate a cut file so that you cut all sides except for one, if that's what you want to do, how do we do it, right? Or let's say it doesn't even have to be that. It could be simply also just rectangles, change the size of the rectangle, but also again cut three sides and leave one side, so the rectangle can actually almost like a hinged door can open and close. So if I can actually generate a pattern that simply does that, and it's almost like a microplane cheese grater, so what happens when that microplane is at building scale? you know, when that this panel is 4 feet by 3 feet size, what kind of can actually also cut another exactly the same size with mylar material, so it begins to reflect light, or you know, so or again, laminate, right? Run this file twice. One time you cut mylar, and the second time you cut through thick cardboard material and you laminate it. So how does that composite material begin to perform and generate this larger environmental effect, right? So again, you know, what I want you to understand in terms of manipulating this file, it's only a few things. What do these sliders do? You know, how does this slider begin to affect the patterns? So this one changes the bounding, right? The largest size and the smaller size, it changes the outcome of that. So this is the lower bound, changes the lower number. This, you know, so the smallest is no longer 0, but you know, so this is the lower bound, changes the smaller size of the geometry. This changes the larger size of the geometry. Okay. This changes how many times that the base surface is divided. This base surface is our canvas. It's 4 feet wide by 3 feet. So that would be the you know, the basic sort of manufacturing canvas that we might be using. What would be a good reference is to say, you all have 1 Pratt access. So if we go to production, and we go to digital cutting, go to material. So these are all the different materials that we can cut, right? So what happens if we cut open foam, make it soundproofing material? What happens if we cut vinyl? Again, vinyl is it's a thicker material that has mass to it. It's quite an interesting material to work with. Closed cell foam or rubber, right? Or cardboard. You know, Bristol board. Bristol board is a kind of a museum board material that's very, very common, right? So with the Zoom cutter, you get really, really clean cuts. You know, laser cutter will give you burn marks and everything here and smell like, you know, burnt stuff for weeks. But the digital cutter give you like museum quality cuts. So it's really, really beautiful. So with Bristol board, we can do what's called print and cut. That means that you can actually run through the Bristol board through an inkjet printer. So you can actually combine printed pattern or printed material and then cut. You know, not something that you can do viably with a laser cutter as well. So there's a lot of, so these are the kind of explorations that I want you to do. You know, we are practically just charging you material costs, right? So if you look at, you know, let's say do a print and cut, print a Bristol board, 2-ply Bristol board, you know, it charge you $15 for both the material and the cut. Okay, so 35, 40.
So how does it work? Do we submit and they cut it for us?
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. So if you buy like just the board itself, 30 by 40, $16. Okay. So so we are basically you know, because we buy in huge volume, so we're really just not making any profits, right? So this is a really, really interesting way to do a quick prototype, because you know it's super low cost. You can do things at super large scale, and what you do is You learn how to create the cut file. You submit it online, and you just pick it up. We will also tour the facility if you want to do something that's slightly unusual, more custom. I work there, so I can get them to do anything for you guys. So so you guys have that privilege as well. So part of what you want to understand is understand the limitation of the machine, right? How many different knife cutter do they use? What is the smallest size geometry they can cut? How clean does it cut when it's doing like straight 90-degree angle? So part of this whole thing will mostly be about making the fabrication file work rather than spending way too much time on trying to fiddle with the design, right? I want you to come up with a quick idea, right? If you want to deal with light, well, what do you want to cut? Do you want to cut, let's say, for example, just look at the material list. We have these materials are the material that we have in stock. So what that means is that we have the material. You can get them from us basically at lower than market value. And we can cut it for you because someone else already have spent the time figuring out all the settings. That means that what knife is best to make this cut and how clean does it come out. You can also source your own material. You can bring your, if you have something that you want to cut that is not on this list, it's a flat fee, $10 per cut, and then you buy the material. So, that because the $10 goes into having someone spending the time to figure out of the 9 different knife cutter that we have, which one is best to use, at what speed to cut at, and cutting different patterns. Say, oh, it's only good at curve cuts, but then if you have sharp angles, it doesn't come out right, or so someone have to go through a whole set of tests to figure out the material that you just brought over, how we would best utilize it and how to deliver the best results, right? So, but let's say if I want to pursue something with lighting, and if I look at materials like this here, how do I begin to formulate an idea? Is it just Bristol board and then cut a bunch of patterns and say, oh, that's the assignment? Well, I would say maybe push a little further, right? So what happens, just like I mentioned earlier, right? Like if you were to say, we can cut leather, aluminum, it's called die bond. It's like an aluminum laminated foam core board. But let's say if we can cut some sort of reflective vinyl material, reflective fabric material, or even like, so we have, what is not on here is because we started working with the fashion department. We have about 30 different types of fabric material that we can cut as well. So what if this 30 by 40 canvas is actually a fabric, a veil? So it's almost like a curtain, So it's like, how feasible is that to cut so many holes on a piece of fabric? Like, does it completely lose its integrity, or can I actually laminate this fabric onto a frame structured, so it has some sort of a support structure in the back, but that this fabric material begins to filter light a certain way, right? So like those are the kind of ideas that I want you to pursue. This whole parametric grasshopper thing is really a tool that's essentially not that important, whether you use it, to get the pattern you want. Like what this is really good at, right, is that, again, because we're now dealing with culturally, rather than objects, but designing in patterns. What that means is, we have here 14,000 circles. You're not going to hand cut this. Laser cut, because it's laser cutting so close, this paper will completely burn up before you can even get the cut, right? Like there are things that can be done because of technology, because of the machines that we have that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, right? And that's why we're using this sort of patterning, because it highlights the technology, because it's now made possible that we can do something like this that, yeah, you wouldn't be able to do, most of the time. And it's cheap because, we're cutting paper that's, like for less than $20, you can actually get a full scale 1-to-1 prototype out, right? You can actually, what I really like to do is, like, if you want to deal with light, find a window in your department that and install that and make that dimension, because we're talking about, even for full scale prototype, is like, $20-$30, you can do that, right? So yeah, so that's sort of the mindset I want you to get yourself into. Like, think about full scale prototype and environment, whether or not you want to spend so much time in Grasshopper or not. Yeah, it's not the main point. The main point is actually the prototype, the material version of this, right? Because that's what's going to impress people in terms of, we have been in the digital age, like designing on the computer screens for the last 20 years. Moving things out of the computer screen is actually, what matters today, is because that's, yeah. So what we want to do is, again, when we begin to, I just need you to know enough of Grasshopper, like for those of you who are new to this, to be able to, create something interesting, right? And if there are certain things that you want to do that is not part of this example set, let me know. I can, more than happy to help you out, right? But for those of you who are familiar, I would say, quickly get to a design idea, right? So let's say work within the limitation of constraints, right? Understand that, you shouldn't be spending 2 weeks on a Grasshopper model. You should be spending 3 hours on a Grasshopper model, but then 3 weeks, the rest of the 3 weeks should be, figuring out how to fabricate as many prototypes as possible, and then getting some really interesting results and testing it out, like doing, full scale installation, right? So let's say for something like this, so look at the material list and say, can I cut, let's say, a foam core, closed out foam, but then laminate, oops. And laminate, Bristol board on either end, or maybe cut honeycomb boards. So honeycomb board has thickness about 1/2 inch thickness, so it's fairly rich, it's fairly stable. But then because of the ugly, cardboard color, you can laminate other things onto it to make it look different, right? So can you actually combine effects to generate something, again, whatever environmental effects that you want to pursue. Okay. So
how this print and cut works?
So
Is it on the same machine, or should you take it to the printer first? And
so it's all done. You submit a file, they will do it all for you.
okay.
But seeing the process is kind of
Professor, you mentioned that this one will provide a much cleaner cut than the laser cutting.
Yep, for sure. So printing cut is similar to this, right? So you actually use printed material on a professional printer. What is amazing about this machine is you can print registration dots. So you typically, if you do it yourself, how do you align it so it cuts precisely? That will be a major headache. So what this machine does is when you print the pattern, you can print these registration dots. It's just literally a black circle around the pattern. And so the machine has a camera right at the head. And so what it does is it aligns itself. So you literally just throw the print onto the bed and the machine aligns itself and it will just cut precisely around the edges. So what that means is you can combine effects. If you're thinking about heat, we can print dark area that will collect more heat from sunlight. And let's say also combine it with like reflective materials. So areas that you want to reject heat, areas that you want to absorb heat, and then cut that out, fold it into a certain pattern, right? Like that's sort of where you begin to, you're allowed to explore a lot more than just the pattern itself. Now the color becomes part of the environmental effect, because color, like again, different shades. So the project that you mentioned called the eco-ceramic, a big part of it is looking at the idea of structural color. So a lot of colors that we perceive is from pigmentation, right? So let's say this is white because it has a layer of black pigments that comes from some sort of mineral or some sort of metal, right? So that pigment absorbs light. But let's say if you look at a butterfly wing, when you see, because it's translucent, and when you see under the sunlight, it has different colors. So because the structure of the wing itself is so small, it's actually causing color changes because it's from light changes. It's refracting the wavelength differently, almost like looking at a CD, or DVD. I don't know if you guys are old enough to know CD, but right. So it gives you different colors. So and those colors come from the tiny little bumps that was scored to on the CD surface itself, right? So that's called structural colors. So color that is caused by the changes in the surface structure, not by pigmentation. So one is the effect of material, and the other is the effect of light. So that's sort of where we can begin to play around, so you can actually use the printer pigment to cause temperature change, but you can also find material that's super light, that has kind of it's been very popular this day. It's called dichroic material, dichroic glass, right? Glass that actually changes color procedurally. So you see that in storefronts a lot these days. It's been so you can actually find, let's say, acrylic material that has a layer of dichroic coating on it, and you can again run it through. So one thing about the Zoom cutter is it cuts acrylic with like super nice precision. Like the edges is like glass surface. So it's acrylic is something that every time you go to the shop and try to laser cut acrylic, and then people are like, oh man, it's off gassing, it's all that stuff, and you get all this burn mark. But we love cutting acrylic here because the surface finish it's unbelievable. So it again opens up different possibility to make quick prototypes and allow you to really iterate through ideas very, very effectively. So I would say, again, big part of this is to quickly decide, what kind of sort of design agenda you want to pursue, and quickly come up with a relatively relevant pattern that you don't mind using, and then start iterating, prototyping, get the pattern out, learn the process of taking a pattern like this over to the Zoom cutter, get something out quickly and see what it looks like, and begin to, do a few iterations, say what happens if I begin to laminate different material together, or, what happens if I begin to alter the surface geometry by, again, like creating bumps. What happens if I combine 3D printed process with a flat cut and begin to, create some sort of, composite material. So that's kind of, I want you guys to explore that a lot more than staying around without Grasshopper. Does it make sense?
Hey, Ted, can the machine also score?
Yes. Score, dotted lines, bevel cuts. So you can actually cut a V groove to make the fold better.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can actually find a 1/2 inch thick material, and then you can do a V groove, 45 degrees. So then when you actually fold it back together, it's completely seamless on the other side.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah. So those are, again, very, very quickly is part of getting a starter file ready, right? Like what is the base pattern that you want to explore? And from that base file, do you want to explore like folding things out, like folding out patterns to create different folds at different angles so you diffuse light differently, right? Or, how do you combine, again, for example, right? Like if one edge of all these different, Voronoi patterns are still attached, but then, so you just basically tap it out. So every single cut it becomes a little tap. How do you begin to control the angle so it doesn't just flop around, but actually maintains it? Like, is there a way to, like you said, John, like, is there a V groove cut? So you always get the 45, like 90-degree cut or 45-degree fold, like those are the things that, it becomes a lot more interesting because now it has, it's not just a pattern, but now combining the material effects, the technology of the manufacturing, how you get that out that, you wouldn't be able to do any other way. So try to, I don't know. I think, for those, since so many of you are already familiar with Grasshopper, maybe I can spend more time recording a video separately, so you guys can go through, so those of you who are still new to this can go through these files, so I can actually go into much more detail, like explaining everything node by node. So all you need to know at this point, right, or I expect you to know is, what happens when you change certain sliders and what kind of effects that you're going to get, and don't do too much into this, but try to get to a somewhat satisfying patterning, and then move into fabrication, material effects, environmental effect. It's where we want to get to. Okay. Now,
How did you replace the image, the file path?
so double click
Uh,
on this, and then you see this window.
hmm.
So a file path. Click on the
Okay,
three dots.
okay.
Yeah. So you can practically replace, any image, and you will see. Oh wait, it's so you see this update. And I'm using a circle just as, again, as the sort of basic exercise. So circular perforations can be interesting, can be very, very attractive way to, like a lot of contemporary buildings do privacy or solar screens like this. So it's a great technique to just know that you can, do this in literally 5 seconds right now. To construct this on your own, I don't know, do you guys want me to go through this node by node, or are you guys okay with it, for those of you who are, because I will be making a recording regardless, but if you guys are, if there is enough interest, those of you who want to revisit, already know Grasshopper, want to revisit, maybe I'll just do it now. So is there, those of you, John, Enrique, what do you think? Is it worth the time to go through it, Alexandra? Or you guys are?
I think I'm okay. Just speaking for myself, I don't mind going back and viewing the video tutorial. I think those actually work better sometimes anyway.
Okay. So I'll record it separately and in much more detail and upload it to the same folder. Okay. So right now, again, I want to just walk through, this in general, and just make sure that. So this will be the kind of format that we will have, right? Every class, every workshop, I'll give you the file that you need to open, and everything is there for you. And there will be recorded videos that walk you through, more precisely. Sometimes I don't get too technical because it's, like I said, sometimes there's just no point to explain exactly how the loft button is programmed. But it's more about how you can use it to create something that fits your purpose than the programming aspect of it, right? So in this case, I will concentrate on things that might affect the outcome, things that you need to know, but exactly what the image sampler is doing and what the numbers are, I'm not going to go into detail. I'm explaining, what those numbers are, or how to structure it, right? So I will leave some details out and then keep some of the more design-related details in. Okay. So in general, right? For this one, so again, just sort of briefly overview. The basic thing you need to know is, again, anytime you want to explore a different pattern, double click on the image sampler node. So these images is straight from the internet, right? I don't have to resize it. I don't have to do anything to it. So I'm just going to try an example. Let's say, find something. This, maybe this, right? So 600 by 600 pixels is more than enough. But you see, this is a square, but then in our case, it's a rectangle. So you know that this pattern will be deformed a little bit. But let's just try it out and see what happens. Where do I have it? Let's see. Okay. So look at the pattern. Whoa. That's new. It's not reading the file. Let's try another one. So something like that. Okay. So it's a good example to just diagnose and see why I don't see anything besides the fact it's a different file format. Let's use a different So I'm moving to a different group of nodes because this one is a bit too complicated. There's so many things going on here. If I'm trying to diagnose a problem why the file is not giving me what I want to see, I should go to a simpler file. That way I don't have so many things to deal with to change at one time, right? So I can just say I'm making my problem smaller when I'm trying to figure out why something doesn't work. Okay. Again, it's the same problem. It has translucency into it, so it could probably. Okay, now it works. So the color brightness channel is not giving me what I want, but I know that this file has transparency. So I can click on the channel to look at the alpha channel, which is the transparency channel. So transparency means, no value, and then black means full value. So it's really it's literally just 0 and 1s right now. So now it's giving me that pattern. So I can simply do a geometric pattern like this and kind of go back to the same thing, right? I don't have to do image, or I don't have to do anything. It can simply be a black and white geometric patterning, and then base the project off of that as well. So I can come back to this and say, change it to the alpha channel, click OK. So now it's showing up. So let me just hide this. Show this. Right. So this file, what it does is it takes. Let me just show you the before and after. Right. So just by showing and hiding different things, I can get different results, right? So that in and of itself is kind of interesting. So what this is doing right now is it takes, let me just walk you through a few of these. The pattern. So if you click preview here, we'll show you what this is. So it's a series of densely packed hexagons. Okay. So this densely packed hexagon is feeding the points to this pattern. And so what that means is this set of points will be filtered out. The ones that are passing through the white value will disappear, and then the ones that are in the black value will be kept. So when you move over to here, right? So you can see that the points from the hexagons has now been filtered. And the points are now fed to generate what's called a Voronoi diagram. So it's basically, if you imagine a bubble growing from each point, and as the bubble growing and begins to touch another bubble, the boundary of those bubbles is what's generating these curves. So that's called Voronoi diagram. Okay. So you can see this edge is the bubble begins to grow and then now touching the edge of these other nodes, okay? So the Voronoi diagram is now being scaled. So, to create a smaller version so that, when you cut out, you still keep some material. You don't cut out completely the boundary. So that's what this is doing. But what, let's say if you use another, let's say if you use another image, so go back to the Steve Jobs image. And now we need to go back to the intensity channel, right? So what's happening here is it's doing what it's supposed to do for the most part, but the outside, the white area, the Voronoi bubble, they're too big, or like, aesthetically, I think this kind of shape is a bit too severe. So this group node down here is basically doing the same thing by generating first a set of random points on the canvas. And then it's going through the filtering process once again, using the brightness value. So now only the white part, or only the points that falls into the white area is kept, and the dark area will be filtered out. So you can see over here. So let me hide this. So you can see, the points that in the darker shaded area is lost, right? Only in the bright area is kept. So, and then I combine this with this, right? So the result is a pattern like this, right? So the outside pattern is no longer as severe like this one, right? But it's a bit more, visually gentle, right? So that's what the complication is, right? So a lot of the design decision made, why you see, this is much more complicated than any of this, is just to get certain aesthetic effects going, right? But again, we have some time to explore those effects, to do what you want to do. And also, again, depends on how you want to move forward with a pattern. I will have time next week to help you with it. So we have one session. So this week, you will soon learn that this course will be fairly easy. I practically don't expect you to spend much time working on this course. Most of the things that you can do during the class, right? But if you have interest in pursuing combining the effort from this course with your other classes, you can pursue it on your own time. But what I need you to do is really just familiarize yourself with these nodes, and try to get a pattern. Your job will be mostly involved with finding an interesting pattern, making certain outcome that you can take to the cutter to generate a cut file, and making it work. So between today and next week, you should come simply with a image pick and then somewhat of a pattern that you want to work with. Next week, we'll spend our class time, figuring out how to take the file to the cutter. It does, it's not that difficult, but again, the difficulty will comes with, let's say, how you want to cut it. Do you want to fold? Do you want to have a bevel cut? Do you want to, it's not like that. That decision is basically like any laser cut file. It's, folded or lightly scored line is a different layer on a PDF. Cut line is a different layer in the PDF. A bevel line is a different layer. So it's about structuring the file. So when they read it in the machine, they can separate those lines and assign different machine process to the file. But from our perspective, how do you continue to use Grasshopper or structural Rhino file effectively, so that all those information is maintained, is organized? So that will be our job next week to move that file to the machine process. So yeah, think about what kind of effects that you want to pursue, and bring your file over. So since next week we'll still be under COVID lockdown, we have a folder here. Actually, no. So in our Google Drive, there's a submission folder. Just create a folder with your name. So week 1 or week 2, just bring your file, and then we can, go through your file and see, how we can help you get your file to where it needs to be, and then be fed to the machine. Have some idea of, again, what kind of material effect that we want, or environmental effects that you want to push through with the design. And it's shouldn't be, overthinking this too much. Just quick decision. It's more about going through the whole process for this first 2 exercises. Okay, so if you guys are okay, I would like to spend the last 15-20 minutes so helping the other people who don't have this running, so I can actually have them share the screen and get things running on their machine. So yeah.
Could I ask a question, Professor?
Yep.
Are you gonna put this recording on the same Google
Yes,
Drive?
it will be in the Google Drive.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Under
know
so
what's the process.
workshop 1, it will be in the workshop 1 folder. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I'll see you next week. And those of you who still don't have it running, stay and we can figure it out in the next 15 minutes.